Hi guys and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to talk about a small SMSL D12. It's a very budget-friendly DAC/headphone amp going for $150. And what does it bring for that amount of money? Let's find out. As you can see, D12 is a very small desktop unit, and it features two ways that you can connect to it. That's USB in form of USB-C port and also Bluetooth connectivity. There is no SPDIF coaxial or Toslink optical connection, so it's very simple USB and wireless DAC. And the other USB port that you can see here is reserved for a separate power supply that should also be 5 volts. But if your digital source that says USB in is powerful enough, you can power it only through that one. For example, when I connected it to my desktop PC, I only needed that one cable, which carries both signal and power, and this one worked great. But if by any chance you're using maybe wireless connectivity or a digital source that does not have sufficient power on its USB output, you can add separate 5 volts power supply. And when it comes to output side of connectivity, we have RCAs on the back, that single-ended connection, non-balanced, and then 6.35 millimeters headphone output on the front. And that's basically it. It's a single-ended unit, no balanced connections in any way or form. And we have a really small LED display, but it's functional. It shows you some basic info like sample rate of the digital signal being played or volume that you selected, and it's just functional. Yeah, by the way, the headphone output is of a decent power. It has 400 milliwatts in 16 ohms, 300 milliwatts in 32 ohms, and then SMSL doesn't specify the power into higher impedances. But in my experience, it has quite a bit of power, and I've connected to this one quite power-hungry headphones like Gold Planar GL2000s and AKG K702, which are low in sensitivity and cannot work with every low-powered headphone amp, but worked just fine with this D12. And that is also a distinction that a desktop product like this one, even this small and affordable one, has compared to a DAC dongle. And there are some great DAC dongles like Moondrop Moonriver 2 or Shanling UA5 that I really liked. Their sound fidelity is top-notch, but their power is usually lacking a little bit. None of these dongles cannot power AKG K702, for example, to a sufficient loudness and dynamics. Something's gotta give there. But this one has no problem with it, because it's a desktop, more powerful device. Some other things worth mentioning is that it is MQA certified, if you care about that, but I hear that MQA is on not so sure to survive these days, and Tidal is going lossless, the same way as Qobuz. Yeah. But if you are still into MQA, because there are other ways and sources of MQA, Tidal is not the only one, this one has it, and for such affordable price, it's quite surprising to me, to be honest. Also, it's based around AK DAC chip, I'll put that one on the screen, and I have to say that both RCA outputs and headphone output share the same kind of tonality and sound quality. So I will not be talking about them separately, but about the sound of this device in general. So let's do that. Well, right out of the box, I noticed that D12 sounds quite well balanced, and I could freely say neutral. So there's like decent bass depth and authority, and it's not overly warm, but it's not lean and too like thin in any sort of way. And then highs are well extended and open and airy, and sun just came out. I think it heard that I'm talking about open and airy highs. So yeah, but it's not high frequency emphasized kind of sound. It's just that everything is there. You can hear great extension, great air and atmosphere from the tracks. And then the mid-range, it's once again like just there. Vocals are present, instruments are present. They're not particularly forward, but also not laid back. And in my mind and to my ears, this is basically as neutral sounding DAC and headphone amp as it gets. It doesn't get anything emphasized or anything deducted. It will basically let your headphones lead the way with their own tonality. It will not add much of its own tonal character. Soundstage-wise, it feels decent. When I listen to it in isolation, I do not feel blown away by the soundstage. But do remember, please, that I do often test much pricier gear with better, bigger, deeper sound stages. So you get used to that, and you notice that D12 is not a champion when it comes to sound staging, but it's also not too congested. It doesn't sound small and thin either, and especially when you consider the price, I actually say it sounds pretty decent. And finally, dynamics. Once again, very boring review so far. Everything is okay. It's not like impressing you or being really extremely dynamic and lively sounding, but it's not lazy and flat either. It's just a well-rounded, well-sounding product. And I quickly realized that just listening to it in isolation will not lead me too far, because it simply sounds good. And I am confident enough to say that it sounds good. You wouldn't go wrong with it. But of course, this wouldn't be my channel if I didn't do comparison to some other stuff near this price point and bother you for a few more minutes. So first of all, I wanted to compare it as a DAC. As a DAC only, on its RCA outs, I compared it to Topping E30 II. That is priced the same at $150. But yeah, I hear you say, that is only a DAC. It doesn't have a headphone amp. That is an advantage for E30 and disadvantage for D12. And yes, you're right. E32 sounds better as a DAC. First of all, it's definitely not as neutral as D12. It has a little bit of bassy thing going on. Bass is a little bit emphasized and maybe a touch warmer. And that impression is also only strengthened by slightly tamer and more laid-back highs that E32 is doing. So in general it sounds a little bit darker, but it is cleaner sounding, more dynamic sounding, and with a darker background. It creates a little bit better feeling of just three-dimensional sound staging and cleaner tones with a darker background. But as I said, E32 is a DAC only. SMSL has those in this same price category too, like Sanskrit MK3 that I haven't tested yet. But for now, I wanted to move to something that's actually more comparable, like more two-in-one product with headphone amp too. And I had this SMSL, just slightly pricier SMSL C200 at hands. It's around $220, I think, so a little bit pricier than D12 here, and you can see also it's a little bit bigger. And C200 is powered directly from the power socket. You don't need external power supply, 5 volts, etc. And that's probably why we have this difference in sizes. Other than that, controlling the knob, the display, they're quite similar. But talking about their sound fidelity and the differences, C200 does sound a little bit more full-bodied when it comes to its tonality. And tones feel slightly more palpable and more 3D. The difference is not huge, but it's there. And when you add a little bit darker background and a little bit deeper sound staging, it feels that everything is placed inside of more three-dimensional sound stage with C200, and each tone is slightly more three-dimensional and palpable too. Going back to D12, again, tonality is quite good. You don't miss much of the sound, but everything is just a touch more flat and more in line with each other, like tones, singers, and instruments around them, and not fully as flushed out as with C200. But that said, while I did notice that, the absolute difference between these two is not huge, and it will depend a lot on what you're pairing it with. So for example, if I tested these two with hifi HE4XX, or Moondrop Void, or AKG K702, the difference, the perceivable difference, was not that big at all. You could hear all of this if you focus and listen to both of these carefully, but it was not immediately obvious when you switch from one to the other. But with slightly more revealing headphones, with higher dynamic range and everything, like Gold Planner GL 2000s, you notice these differences more. And that actually leads me to giving some personal opinions who D12 might be good for and who it might not be that suitable for. And for example, if you're using like price comparable headphones, like I mentioned, hifi's 4XX or Sennheiser's 5 something something, AKG K702, and your budget is strained already and you don't plan to upgrading to any expensive headphones anywhere near in the future, then you can save some money and go for D12 because the difference between these two is not that big at all. But if you have pricier headphones already, more revealing headphones, then I would say, yeah, save just a little bit more, go for C200, it will show, especially if you're like a careful listener, if you pay attention to details. Oh, just one more thing before we end this. I know that some of you will probably ask, what about Topping DX3 Plus Pro? And I don't have that one with me anymore, but I did compare it to C200 directly. And it was more analytical and more dynamic sounding, even compared to C200. So that topping will retrieve more details, especially in high frequency. It will have crisper edges and more dynamic sound. But it will come at the cost of musicality. Because DX3 Pro Plus sounds thin and dry, and not very smooth or coherent, a word that I started using recently. And yeah, even though technically it is technically better sounding DAC and headphone amp, I'm not too fond of it. If you're into that, by all means go for it, but in this case, with this particular topping, I prefer SMSLs. And if you have that amount of money, go for C200. I prefer it to DX3 Pro Plus. If you want to save a little bit and you don't care about every last bit of fidelity, then you can go for D12. It's a pretty decent, small, practical desktop product with power to drive basically anything that you can reasonably throw at it. And that's it about it. Now, if you're thinking about purchasing D12, please check my links down below the video that will lead you to Hifi Go, an online store that sent this one in for review. They're nice guys, they worked with me almost since the beginning of Is It Worth It channel, and they send in many samples for review. They never influence what I have to say, not that I would work with them otherwise, by the way, but yeah. Check that link, and if you like the video, then click that button, consider subscribing, and see you next time. Bye.